Hi, everyone. Harry here to talk about, even for Donald Trump, a day, one of the, 10 days that will live in infamy for the absolute outrageous corruption of executive power. And I'm talking about his pardons of all the co-conspirators and a long list of others, including state electors who we know broke the law, went in for Trump and represented themselves falsely to be duly elected when they were nothing of the sort. Basically trying to wipe the historical slate clean in an absolute Orwellian fashion by a completely abusive exercise of the pardon power. I've said before, his use of the pardon power has been about as bad as anything he's done in terms of complete self-serving disservice to the American people, the criminal justice system, etc. And this is just a, complete mopping up of every stain, or at least attempted, from January 6th itself. Okay. The January 6th indictment for Trump had 6 co-conspirators. The reason they were not named in the indictment was because they could gum up the works, and Smith was very focused on speed. And so as I said at the time, most important part of the case was the caption, just USA versus Trump. But it was a conspiracy, and no way even Trump could have done it without all these helpers. And they included, well, let's start the 6 co-conspirators, the people who we already know Jack Smith has found committed criminal activity in furtherance of the conspiracy. Rudy Giuliani, a complete dishonest scoundrel, say anything that goes for all of these people, really. John Eastman, who's the architect of the ridiculous anti-constitutional plan that says Pence doesn't have to do his job. He can make it all up and throw everything into disarray. Sidney Powell, a lawyer at Giuliani's side, who will say any kind of crap. Also, Ken Chesebro, who, along with Eastman and others, is really furthering the supposed intellectual background for these lawless maneuvers to stay in power, notwithstanding everything pointing in the other direction, and notwithstanding, of course, that what they're trying to defeat, the peaceful transfer of power, is the sort of sine qua non, excuse my legal language, but man, I am hot and bothered about this. Boris Epstein, the much anticipated, was never exactly nailed down, but seemed to everyone's lights, co-conspirator number 6. So you take the whole thing and just wipe it clean. And it's clear that that's what's going on. And here's one way to tell. Who's not in there? Clark, Trump's man at DOJ, ready to lie and send a letter to Georgia saying we found fraud in the election. And as Trump says, my Republicans in Congress will do the rest. The very subject of the showdown, where all of DOJ said, we're quitting if you do this, and Trump backed down. Why isn't he in there? Because the Supreme Court's infamous immunity opinion already says anything involving conversations with DOJ can't be part of a crime, can't even be considered. So he was already safe. Who else is in there? In some ways, the worst, even though he's not a co-conspirator in the indictment. Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, and as close as you got to mission control on that day, he spends the most time with a crazed, unhinged Donald Trump. He is the conduit to all these people, Republicans in Congress, who are basically, on different gradations of wanting to further Trump's plans. They're now saying, what an outrage that we were looked into. On the contrary, it was an essential part of, but it would be a later part of the investigation. If this investigation had not been aborted by Trump's election, Trump would have proceeded to trial, probably been convicted, and now there's years to go with all these other folks who are integral to the conspiracy, and full investigation of the people, of the members of Congress who were likewise integral to the conspiracy. All that is now just completely, or the effort is, and it's going to be largely successful effort, just wiped out. Because, and let me go to the sort of, are these kinds of pardons, do they work? Because what they basically say is anything and everything that they've done in the past, no federal crimes. It seems pretty loosey-goosey, but pardons, in part because the president's power is so large, but also because they don't have real occasion to be considered by the court. It just sort of happens and there's no one to sue about it. Pardons are kind of governed a little by a common law. What's happened before, and did the country accept it? And then Nixon case here figures large because Gerald Ford, coming into office, probably at the insistence of Richard Nixon, pardoned him for any and all crimes, whatever could be out there. You know, Nixon knew that there were people with knives out, as they were, and they would come up with something else. If Ford, you know, whatever list he had, there would be something more to come. And the same thing now. So these kinds of, further investigation could augment the list of crimes that these now pardoned folks could be charged with. And, you know, if sanity ever returned to the country, and depending on how the statutes of limitations would run, they would be potentially, have this over their heads, and either be convicted or have it over their heads for their careers, as indeed they should be. These guys are all just traitors of the first order. And now so it's not only the deep injustice about them, it's completely inimical to the way pardons are supposed to work, which is people who are guilty and have made strides to reforming themselves, being contrite, understanding what they've done. That's the people who are supposed to be subject to pardons. And there's a whole process, which of course was completely ignored here, so that Trump's cronies could be pardoned arbitrarily, basically. Arbitrarily in the sense, not the opposite of arbitrary, in the sense that these were the people he wanted to, help whitewash his role in history. But otherwise arbitrary in that it had nothing to do with the way pardons are supposed to work. Third, it's, completely this effort to, absolutely, it's as Orwellian as it can be. You have not these, okay, here's a bad customer, but he's seen his way through, like, just to take the example of a couple of days ago, Darryl Strawberry. Trump wasn't saying he's the greatest guy ever. He said he was deserving of a pardon. That's at least somewhat the way pardons work. He's, it's many years ago, etc. These very people, you have the White House spokesperson come out and say these are American heroes who were subject to weaponization and political prosecutions by the Biden administration. An outrageous fiction that is just part and parcel of trying to whitewash the whole event that is the worst crimes ever committed by a president by a long shot. Both, a sort of dual agenda of whitewashing them as if they never happened. And to the extent they did, it was all true red-blooded patriots fighting for this country and now being weaponized by the president. It's just completely topsy-turvy, but in a way that tells a terrible wrong-headed message about America. And the final point here, in some ways the most galling, yes, Trump got totally lucky and has escaped accountability, but at a minimum, there were prospects for including with investigations of these very people for the historical record to be filled in and understood. It's essential, right? We did it with this most recently, 9/11. We tried to do it with the Mueller report, but we now have so many gaps in what happened here. Just think about the members of Congress. That's a big one. And now the hope, I think of the very last scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they take all the Ark, and it's just down in the back of a warehouse, and never to be seen again. Except here it's even worse because the facts are never to be developed. Law enforcement can't do it, at least federal law enforcement, because there's no investigation to open. Historians can try, but there'll be, individuals asking for materials from the Library of Congress and making their own surmises. It's just the national official investigation that has cried out for, literally, at best is crippled, and Trump goes a long way, not 100%, but a long way toward achieving his most pernicious, anti-constitutional, and Orwellian goal of making it out like his, absolute betrayal of the Constitution never happened. And to the extent it happened, it was actually more patriotic than the people on the other side. Head-bending, absolutely outrageous, even for this guy. We should all have, be fuming today and be completely outraged, not just that justice hasn't been done in the abstract, but for all of us, our children, our grandchildren. The historical record is going to be purposely impoverished and distorted. Really, really repugnant. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.